Good evening, distinguished guests and colleagues. I'm here this evening to accept the award of Executive of the Year. But before I start down the road of thanking those who have had an immediate impact on my success as a professional and as a person, I'd like to take time out to discuss a few creative minds that all of us know that have influenced us either directly or indirectly in terms of our process personally and professionally as well. The first one I would like to discuss is Sigmund Freud. The first thing that stuck out in my mind about Sigmund Freud and we connected on this level was that he and I are very similar in that we were both from lower middle class backgrounds, at least initially, which obviously affected the way we look at the world and our growth and development as him being an academic and myself being a business professional. Coming from those communities, you have an ingrained work ethic and understanding that you are not a silver spoon baby, and that anything that you obtain or acquire in your life is the result of your own personal hard work and determination. So that's something that Sigmund Freud and I definitely connected on. That his family struggled financially, as I stated, living in a rented room in the house of a blacksmith when Sigmund was born. So this again shows that, ultimately, Sigmund became the man that he became because of those circumstances, but also in spite of those circumstances, which is very similar to my background, as I stated, coming from very humble beginnings in the Motor City of Detroit, Michigan, and my family for the most part working hard and trying to provide the basic necessities. But I understood that education was my key to success and moving forward in my life and being a productive member of society. And that being a part of that community and having that work ethic instilled in me definitely has aided me in my success as an executive. The other thing that was extremely very, very similar in my background in Freud is that he attended a prominent high school, and he proved that he was an outstanding pupil and graduated with honors. Same thing is similar in my background in that I was top 5% of my graduating high school class, and I also was being highly recruited to play football at Eastern Michigan University. So I was in a privileged position to use my hard work to my advantage and get to a level that so few of inner city youth especially get to because of circumstances and ultimately personal choices. As a high school senior, I also had planned to study law as Freud did at the University of Vienna, but he joined the medical faculty at the university where his studies included philosophy and physiology, but I pursued business and political science in my endeavor. So, ultimately going in thinking that I was going to be an attorney and turning the page into my next chapter as working for a firm or working in private practice. Ultimately, my experiences dictated to me that I wanted to create and create from my understanding of my background and understanding of what I learned growing up, so that I can apply the principles of financial freedom and money management and building within a university in the entrepreneurial sense, or in the entrepreneurial sense. Also, in analyzing Freud, there was a coming of age in that the light switch finally was flipped on, in that his exploring his own dreams and childhood memories catapulted him into the realm of ultimately embarking on his endeavor as the father of modern psychology. Now, transitioning away from Freud, the next person I would discuss is Albert Einstein, who had a very candid and keen effect on my development. Obviously, Albert Einstein was a German-born theoretical physicist who developed the general theory of relativity, which is one of the two pillars of modern physics. One thing that stuck out, the biggest thing with him that stuck out was not only the background, the socioeconomic background that he was born into, but his fascination for the unknown. in my research, I found a story where his father once showed him a pocket compass. At that point, Einstein realized that there must be something causing the needle to move, despite the empty space that he saw. So as he grew, Einstein built models and mechanical devices for fun and began to show talent for mathematics. But that one statement pinpointed to me and my background and my similarity to him, in that he was always thirsting after the unknown. He wanted to understand why things happened and why things occurred the way they did, and I could see that even into my adulthood. I could harken back to a time when I used to have a paper route, in that I wanted to understand how I can maximize my time frames at that early peak in the morning to maximize my dollar, because there was a commission paid of $1.25 per paper delivered on time. So to a 12, 13-year-old, $1.25 per paper is a big deal, because that could be as hard as you want to work. So I always was looking for the ways to get to that next phase quicker, whether I could skip 2 or 3 houses and maybe put 1 or 2 papers over in a particular section the night before to save myself 15 to 30 seconds on my next delivery. Things like that always interest me, in that I wanted to understand why things happened the way they did, and how I could improve process, which has ultimately led me into my adult life and my professional career, and henceforth the reason I'm accepting this award. In addition, Einstein's travels with his family were very symbolic, in that his coming of age during that time was directly linked to what he saw and experienced in these various places. Very, very similar to me, in that I moved from Michigan after undergrad, seeking not only opportunities, professional opportunities, but also a better way of life, and that has directly those choices have directly impacted the way I see the world, and what I hold true in my value system. And being able to come from those obviously middle class or lower middle class backgrounds, to be able to create something on my own, and it's very important to me, and ultimately, in analyzing Einstein, I think it was very important to him as well. Einstein to me didn't seem like an excuse maker, and that's another thing that I can directly correlate to myself. He was always searching, after the next thing and the next phenomenon, something to explain the unknown, and that's also very similar to me as an adult, and ultimately as a professional. Now, the next creative thinker is probably as far right as I am left, but very similar in details of his life, in that Pablo Picasso obviously was a Spanish painter, sculptor, printmaker, ceramist, stage designer, and spent most of his adult life in Europe. And he's widely known as one of the greatest and most influential artists of the 20th century, having a founding influence on the Cubist movement and the invention of constructed sculpture. So looking back into his early life, Pablo Picasso had some similarities to myself, in that Picasso's family was middle class as well. So socioeconomic status comes into play again with this gentleman. His father was a painter who specialized in naturalistic depictions of birds and other games. So and most of his life was a professor at the School of Crafts and a curator of a local museum. So from an early age, he was exposed to his passion, because not only was it's something that he was born to do, but also it was fostered by the creativity of his environment. And that's a very similar occurrence in my personal life, in that my environment growing up in Michigan was always that of education first, and focusing on becoming a better you every day and striving for success and making sure things are always in order for that next step or the next movement. And cultivating those talents and gifts that we were either born with or we were working very hard at to become more proficient in. Very similar in backgrounds in that sense. Ultimately on the very flip side of the coin, not artistically inclined nonetheless, as most of the distinguished colleagues in this in the audience suggest through my Walkman stick figures on the blackboard in the office. But with that, his according to Picasso's mother, his first words were pencil, or piz, or lapis. He received formal training from the age of 7, receiving formal artistic training from his father in figure drawing and oil painting. Obviously, totally different from me. My gifts were more academic and athletically inclined. He was a creator of things, and similar in a sense as well, because as a business professional, we have to create from what's not there. We have to be innovative and use our critical and creative thinking prowess to become successful at a particular task or overcome an objection or an obstruction to what we want to do or what we want to create. So very similar in my background as well with that. Now, transitioning to his personal life, Picasso divided his time mostly between Barcelona and Paris, and he in 1904 he met Ferdinand Oliver, a Bohemian artist who became his mistress through that period. Now, very very different in family values and character from myself and Picasso, in that I'm very centered around focus and my family and making sure that I'm making the right choices for them and for myself. Never had a mistress and never want one. So that's an important difference in character for myself and him. Albeit a brilliant sculptor, painter, just different character issues that are important to me. That were not obviously so important to Picasso. The next thinker or creative mind that had a influence on me as well in my development was Igor Stravinsky. Igor was also an artist. He's a Russian and composer, pianist, and conductor. So he was widely considered to be one of the most influential and important composers of the 20th century. His career was inspired by his stylistic diversity, and he first achieved international fame with 3 ballets commissioned during his time. So very much an artist, very much an artist, and a right brain thinker. In that I'm totally different. My creative talents are in commerce and in the marketplace and in business. Whereas he was a creator of great music, internationally known and respected for his craft. The interesting thing when analyzing Igor Stravinsky was my take on Igor was that he seemed more of an introvert, which is a stark contrast to who I am as a person. I'm very outgoing, the life of the party. I don't mind having conversations with everyone, as my esteemed colleagues would attest to. So he just recalling his school days as being lonely, and one of his most famous statements was he never came across anyone who had any real attraction for him. Very very confident in my abilities to communicate with others. So Igor and I don't connect on that level, but in terms of his growth and development, we were different also in socioeconomic status. His father was of Polish noble descent, the Strawinsky family, which is the Selima coat of arms, directly connected with that. But one thing that's very similar in his background that after deep diving into Stravinsky was his parents' expectations of him were to become a lawyer. Very similar to my background in that very much a communicator and outgoing and able to um, roam and operate in many circles. My family also had expectations of me becoming an attorney, with me declaring my major in undergrad as pre-law and political science. So, him and I definitely are on the same page in terms of family pressures and in terms of the expectation of those parties who you want to impress or those parties who you want to make proud. But ultimately, he attended fewer than 50 sessions during his 4 years of study and essentially followed his passion into music, which ultimately led to his acclaim and success in that field. Another similarity of Igor Stravinsky and I is that he seemed to be very enterprising in that he formed a business and musical relationship with the French piano manufacturing company Pleyel, which essentially acted as an agent in collecting mechanical royalties for his work and provided him with a monthly income and a studio space at his headquarters in which he could work and entertain friends and business acquaintances. This is very similar to my enterprising thought process in that, looking for the next thing and looking for the next big thing in order to maximize my visibility in the market and also make money for my company. Now, one of the last few creative minds that had a direct influence is probably very similar to my background in that he's American born, very very blue collar middle class family from New England who had moved to St. Louis, Missouri. His father Henry was a successful businessman and ultimately president and treasurer of the hydraulic press brick company in St. Louis. But his mother wrote poetry and a social worker, and this is T.S. Eliot. T.S. obviously came from a very, very large family. He was the last of 6 surviving children, and his parents were middle age when he was born, around 44, 45. He had 4 sisters that were between 11 and 19, and his brother was 8 years older. So, several factors are responsible for Eliot's infatuation with literature during his childhood. First, he hadn't overcome a physical limitation, which was vastly different than my experience. As a child, I was very, very much athletic, didn't have any physical ailments at all. So most of my childhood was spent any free time I could gather outside of schoolwork and any outside reading or research that I was doing. I was on the athletic field, running and jumping and playing football, basketball, and whatever other ball game I could get a hold to. But this is what made him different in that he had to overcome his physical limitations. So he made another part of his body stronger, which was his mind. So he could not participate obviously in any physical activities and prevented him from interacting socially with peers. So once he learned to read, he immediately obsessed with books and was completely absorbed in the tales depicting savages. When it came down to being a strong mind and being able to execute academically, I was able to be successful in that realm as well. Now, one of the last 2 minds that is very interesting in her influence on American modern dance and choreography. Her dance has been compared, with the influence that Picasso had on modern visual arts and Stravinsky had on music. So, very much an interplay in their respective industries and how they influenced popular culture in a sense as well. Very different from me in that she was a performer, a dancer, a person who expressed herself visually with her body. I express myself through words and reports and speeches based on metrics driven by the company for success. So very different, but very similar in that there is a level of creativity in trying to obtain a certain metric by way of action. Albeit she was creating art via dance, I create art via business. And I like to look at it that way with Martha. her humble beginnings in Allegheny City, which is part of Pittsburgh, PA now. Very, very middle class, steel town, blue collar work ethic. So, to me, Martha probably as different from me as possible, but very similar in that, those middle class, hard work ethic and that background contributed to her success in her ultimate in her career as a dancer and choreographer. Now, transitioning to the final person who I would say probably had the most profound influence on my growth and development just overall was Mohandas or Mahatma Gandhi, who was, the preeminent leader of the Indian nationalism movement in British-ruled India, famously known for his employing of nonviolent civil disobedience. And obviously Gandhi led India to independence and inspired movements for nonviolence and civil rights and freedom across the world, most notably here in the United States. Obviously, the direct correlation with me is being an African American in the United States. My people struggled for, equality under the law for the better half of the 20th century. And, the correlation, still continues to this day, and in that, minorities across the country are struggling for equal rights or equal protections under the law for just basic necessities in this world that all citizens of this country enjoy. Ultimately, Mahatma was the son of a senior government official and born and raised in Hindu Bani, a coastal community in India, and trained in law in London. Now that's one difference that I can see, a small difference, but a difference nonetheless. In that he came from his family came from, at least at the very surface, came from a position of a prominence, and he was trained in law and was a lawyer by trade. So his growth and development was fostered in a totally different environment than I was. Ultimately, leading to his care for people and for the right thing, with his Muslim and Hindu Indians in various parts of the country, most notably in India and South Africa. The biggest thing also with Gandhi, he's mentioned in the same breath in African American history classes with the Malcolm X's and MLK and all of the notable civil rights leaders, and that's because his plight was across ethnic and racial lines. He wanted everyone, not just African Americans or Indians or whoever it may have been, to have equal protection under the law. Also most notably, my family, various family members of mine were members of political action movements, and most notably the Black Panther Party in the late 1960s and 1970s. So that experience from a parental standpoint and seeing the forward movement of progress for African Americans such as myself, who have all the doors open, and I'm able to have the same rights and freedoms as anyone else under the protection of the law. That experience being raised by those people who didn't have that necessarily or met heavy resistance with those things was an experience nonetheless, and also helped me foster, along with my blue collar work ethic, being the point of the matter of the individual that I ultimately have become. Throughout this speech, I've taken you on a journey of creative minds that have influenced me and my decision making and growth as an individual and professional. But I challenge each and every one of you in the audience to stake your own claim and look out in the marketplace or in the realm of business or art or culture to find that one individual or those series of individuals that are closely related to you and may help bridge the gap between your expectations of success and the path that lead that way. And the last thing before I go, I would like to leave you with a favorite quotation of mine from Peter Drucker about leadership. And it states, effective leadership is not about making speeches or being liked. Leadership is defined by results, not attributes. Thanks so much for having me.